Good afternoon, everyone. It's just past high noon on 420. I am Michelle Rutter Friberg. I am the Deputy Director of Government Relations for the National Cannabis Industry Association, or NCIA. NCIA is the oldest and largest trade association representing the legal cannabis industry. Our membership is comprised of roughly 1,000 businesses, primarily small businesses, that range in everything that they do, from directly touching the cannabis plant all the way over to ancillary services as well. And we're very proud to represent Main Street cannabis, not Wall Street cannabis. I have to do a quick plug for our association, though. We hope that if you own a business that you are a member, of course, but for everyone who's joining us from Capitol Hill today, NCIA will be hosting our 11th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days this May 16th through 18th. So if you work on the Hill, you've definitely gotten an email from me. Make sure you respond. And again, we hope that you can join us for that. So now that we have that out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce our session titled, How Can the Federal Government Prepare for Reform? So if you're not aware, PREPARE stands for the Preparing Regulators Effectively for a Post-Prohibition Adult Use Regulated Environment Act. So we're gonna keep using PREPARE because that's a lot shorter and easier to say. This bipartisan legislation was introduced for the first time during the last congressional session and was just reintroduced in the House days ago, and the Senate companion is coming soon, I believe. So here today to discuss the bill are its lead co-sponsors, Congressman Joyce of Ohio and Senator John Hickenlooper of Colorado. Quick note before I tell you a little bit about these gentlemen, the senator has been delayed. He is casting his vote, but he is going to be joining us shortly. But these two gentlemen hail from different sides of the aisle, but have found common ground in cannabis policy. Congressman Joyce is a Republican, but he co-chairs the Congressional Cannabis Caucus and has been a champion on this issue for many years now. Senator Hickenlooper, who opposed adult use legalization in Colorado during his time as governor, has since become a champion for the issue on Capitol Hill. So, with that, let's talk about how the federal government can prepare for cannabis legalization. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Hello? Okay, it works. Happy 420. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you all for coming out. I first started covering cannabis in 2015 and never would have imagined that I would be celebrating 420 at the Capitol talking to a congressman and a senator. So kind of shows how this issue has evolved. Congressman Joyce, thank you so much for joining us here today. You just reintroduced the PREPARE Act, and I'm curious for your thoughts on how does this bill play among your GOP colleagues? Obviously, cannabis is a bipartisan issue, but there is more resistance from the right on it. So, how is this bill being received by your colleagues, and what are sort of like some of the concerns or some of like the angles that resonate with them?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you all for being here. What PREPARE does is just that. It sort of prepares the federal government for how we're going to move forward if and when we finally get to the day of legalization. But in the meantime, the Democratic majority put out the MORE Act. I'd said then, if the MORE Act passed tomorrow, the federal government would have no idea how to deal with it. And so the PREPARE Act allows people, and let's face it, there's an age issue here as well. And President Biden, he might agree with it in principle, but he hasn't gone all that far as doing this. And when they had everything, they didn't try to put any bills there that he was going to actually get through the House, Senate, and sign. So this, if he's had some unease, the PREPARE Act allows him to get all the agencies, everybody who has their fingers in the pie in any way, to the table. And everybody hash out what their agreements are going to be, where the red lines are, and allow them to develop a system so that if and when it does come about, it can be implemented with due speed. And if you think about it, we're already doing it for the wine and spirits industry. We're already doing it with beer wholesalers. State by state, it's regulated the way the state sees fit, but there's a federal framework in which it all fits in. So this isn't rocket science. This is a matter of trying to get the right people at the table, and by preparing, you get that ease of folks that, okay, I get what the system will look like, because in every state that it's involved in, whether fully legal, medicinally legal, or CBD, there's been some preparation. There's been a framework that's been set up. They're not all consistent. That's great. And that's one of the way I sell it to my constitutionalists, that this is a states' rights issue. But the very important part for every member is meeting them where they're at. To give you a classic example, when I was trying to put things in the appropriations bill, I was meeting a lot of resistance from Dr. Harris, Andy Harris from Maryland. Andy Harris said, you know, I want more research. I said, we want more research, but we can't do research as is. Last year, he and Earl Blumenauer had worked together and passed a research bill. So when you get folks where they're at and get them involved and get them, you know, a level of comfort, you're eventually going to pull more people to the table. And that takes listening, and that takes working through, and advocates like yourself who keep us posted saying, you just had a really good talk with your senator, you had a really good talk with your rep, and here's where they don't like it. Regulation, another one. We don't want kids to get it. None of us want kids to get it. You know, we want to eliminate the black market. We want to create an industry where when people buy cannabis in Ohio or California, they know what they're getting. They know there's no fentanyl. They know that this isn't poisoned in any single way. So I think it's very important that you develop those landmarks and get people where they're at and bring them along so they understand and prepare for the eventual outcome of this. And you know, when I went over to see Senator Hickenlooper, I said, oh, you should tell me. I mean, you're the guy who put it all together in Colorado. How did it work there? Where did you see roadblocks? What happened? And we had a great conversation. Since then, I'm glad to hear he's going to be here today because he's got a lot more insight as to what it looks like on a rollout than I do. But I started on this a decade ago. The first time I voted on a bill in appropriations, it was a VA bill that Sam Farr from California was talking about how, even though at that time it was medically legal in California, that they weren't allowed to prescribe it at the VA hospitals. And so he made a great case for it. And, you know, I agree with him. I was like, that's a great idea. So I voted for it, lone Republican. I was a freshman. As soon as I got back to the office, a speaker wants to see you. That time it was Speaker Boehner. So I had a good relationship with John. I've known him for decades. I go down to see him. He goes, oh, what the hell are you doing? I said, you know, and I explained to him. And then I said, besides, I think it's a states' rights issue. Yeah, don't do it again. And look how far he's come in a decade. But, you know, Justin, okay. Oh, wait a minute. I'll stand for Senator Hickenlooper. And so while Senator gets set up, you know, to finish that story, you know, I kept on speaking up, whether it was we shall not, putting in what we used to call reverse earmarks, where the federal government will not spend money for the IRS to attack cannabis businesses that are legal in their state, and putting in ways to block them through CJS and financial services. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up meeting with Earl and some other folks from the advocacy area, and together we started working on bills, and Earl and I helped craft the States Act that former Senator Gardner and his counterpart, Elizabeth Warren, crafted in the Senate. And you know, we started to see some movement. And this is a town that moves at a glacial pace, but I can tell you that I've seen more movement in the last decade on this than I have on most other big ticket items that you're trying to get pushed along. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Senator Hickenlooper how he feels it's going over there in the Senate.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to join us, Senator. It's a really busy day on the Hill. I know this bill, which would, you know, appoint people to a commission to study cannabis regulations and the potential for a federal framework for regulating cannabis modeled after the alcohol industry. And I know you did something similar in Colorado with convening a task force after legalization. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? And, you know, how did that change the way you look at the issue? And what did you learn from that? And how can that help inform the federal process?
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for moderating. Representative Joyce, thank you so much for being a partner in all this and being such a leader for so long. I'll give you the thumbnail. I mean, I opposed Amendment 64 in Colorado. I didn't want our state to be a laboratory for what I called at the time one of the great social experiments of all time. We were worried about kids doing more drugs, more frequency, more overall consumption, driving while high. And Colorado we passed it, and I have to say I was proven wrong. And when we passed it, I didn't know we were going to be wrong, but I wanted to make sure to follow the will of the voters. And we created the Amendment 64 task force, and we really tried to get everybody at the table, people that were against it, people that were for it. We wanted to prove that if this worked in Colorado, then it could work anywhere, and it would be non-harmful. And we're lucky in Colorado, we have a thing called the Healthy Kids Survey, where every year they go out and survey thousands of kids. Last year, they surveyed almost over 100,000 kids. And I can say now, a decade later, that there is no increase in experimentation among teenagers. There is no increase in consumption. There is no increase in driving while high. And we look at now some of the other beneficial, instead of having an underground commercial activity where there's no security, the violence is rampant, last year we collected $325 million in taxes that went to schools and, very focused sources. Since legalization began, we're at $3.2 billion. So it really is a question of how do we prepare to do this, and that's why we call it the Prepare Act, is to look at setting up just what we did with the Amendment 64 task force, and that we look at bringing that same group of people together, not just the people who are for it, but the full orchestra. The Representative Joyce said that Washington moves at a glacial pace. Well, it does, but have you noticed there's climate change, and those glaciers are moving a lot faster than they used to. It's not a good thing in the case of glaciers, but it could be a good thing in terms of for legalizing recreational marijuana. So the Prepare Act mirrors the Amendment 64 task force, brings those same groups together to make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned, that we look everywhere. And we're going to reintro it into this Congress. And there'll be new language to help make sure that we are explicit in protecting young kids from accessing cannabis. We're always trying to improve everything, but I feel this is one of those things where if we get everybody in this room and everybody around the country who understands that this isn't what we were told, this isn't what tradition spoke to us about, this is just bad policy to have, to make a narcotic like marijuana illegal. Right? And it should be, every state should be able to make we don't want to go and tell every state what they've got to do, but let's decriminalize on a federal level. Let's treat it like we do alcohol.
Do you think this kind of a bill is easier to get across the finish line compared to a descheduling bill? For some lawmakers, it may not go far enough. For some, it may bring them in. What's your strategy approaching this?
So it's obviously going to be easier to get across the line because there are a lot of people that regard tradition, the way we've done things in the past. They're very, very, very slow, glacial, in the old sense, in terms of changing tradition. This actually, I think, you're not actually legalizing it yet, but you're laying out, and in the process of laying out a plan of what that would look like, you're helping people who are these traditionalists maybe see it in a different light and look at it and say, so if all these people are going to be at the table and we have all these facts that we've gathered from not just Colorado, but from Washington, from all the states that have gone through this process, maybe this isn't the scary thing that I thought it was, and that maybe this is something we should consider. So I view this as, it's certainly not the end product, but I think it's an accelerator. It's something that will be a catalyst, hopefully, to more discussions, a little deeper thought so people can, I tell people about the Healthy Kids survey that we can demonstrate without question that there's been no increase in experimentation, no increase in frequency, no increase in overall consumption, no increase in driving while high. All these things that people were so worried about, when we can demonstrate that with hard, cold facts, even pretty conservative senators say, huh, I didn't know that.
And the bill does sort of mention the alcohol industry as a model for federal regulations and as sort of like a jumping off point for the commission to look at this issue. And in my job, you know, I talk to a lot of state regulators, I talk to a lot of state lawmakers, and I've been hearing, you know, some concerns that cannabis should not just like be modeled after the alcohol industry, or that the sort of regulations of the alcohol industry don't necessarily translate to cannabis. So Congressman, do you have any response to that in terms of those concerns? And also, you know, I think there's just a general concern about corporatization and monopolization in the industry.
I can appreciate that, but the idea is not so much to do the exact same thing, but to create the skeletal framework that exists for something like both spirits and wine and spirits and beer wholesalers. And then for the cannabis industry, put the muscles on the skeletal framework to make it work for that industry. As the senator rightly pointed out, when he was governor, the first time I saw Colorado took in $30 million in the first month, I think it was, in taxes. What governor in America is going to refuse new money? I mean, they don't even have to work for it. It's coming in. All they got to do is try to regulate it. And as the folks like yourselves who come to town, you're the only ones who come to this town want to be regulated and taxed. Yeah. You want to know what your numbers are. Tax reform, I get it, but you know, we want to fix the problems that exist. And so that's what we're trying to do, and that's why we're trying to build out a system where everybody who has anything to do with it has the ability to bring it and create something that's, for the unique product, that is a unique skeletal framework and muscled framework for this industry nationwide. And I think that's very important for people to understand. We're not trying to copy, we're just trying to model after, because we've seen it work for these other ones. In Ohio, for instance, we still have state liquor stores. So no matter whether you're in Cleveland, Columbus, or Cincinnati, that same bottle of Blanton's, if you can ever find it, it's $52. Never find it, but you can find it here for about 3 times that, but you know, that's just the way it exists. And I talked to my friend David Trone, a member from Maryland who owns Total Wine. He said, we'd never go to Ohio. We only go to states where it's wide open and not regulated, so we can price according to the markets. The same thing can exist here. I mean, it's just a matter of figuring out what the markets are, and he can operate in those states, but he doesn't have to operate in Ohio or anywhere else he doesn't want to. So we got to create a system where everybody can be fair and everybody can be on a level playing field, so you know when you invest in the people you're asking for money to help invest in this will know that given this is the landscape, this is the framework, and together here's why I think we can profit and make money, because I know none of you are really doing this for a hobby. So, you know, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that there's rules and regulations in place that allow you to exist without having the government come in and take unfair advantage of you. That's the other thing that has bothered me to a degree, was the fact that we've done these lottery systems and other things in Ohio, and you're not necessarily letting the landscape, the market compete at its own pace. You're creating these, and we saw it, and as it played out in Ohio, then Michigan went fully legal, so the whole Northwest quadrant up there that had these licenses started to lose money because people go up to Michigan, where they don't have to pay the higher rate, I guess it is, for the cannabis in these places. So, you know, that's the same thing you do in liquor. I mean, if you live near a state line and it's much cheaper, just go over the border and get it, so be it. You know, but that's some of the things that we need to factor in, and how people can happily coexist in this market and make it worthwhile, so you know what the facts and what the faults are of going into the business.
You know, and I agree with everything that Representative Joyce said, but I think the liquor model, I don't think it's intended to be explicit. And you kind of refer to this, it's a framework, but what it does is a lot of people have trouble accepting something completely new if they haven't seen it themselves, if they haven't been to Colorado, Washington. And the liquor framework is what everybody knows. They understand that, and you could, if I drive from Denver down to, let's say down to Dallas, I'll go through parts of Oklahoma and parts of Texas that are dry counties, where those counties decided they didn't want to sell beer or liquor of any sort. I don't see anything wrong with that, of that local control. And I think that's what I think of in terms of the framework. It's providing a way of thinking about this that is familiar to people. The money, the tax money, it's great. I don't think, and I'm sure we agree on this, I don't think government wants to be in the business of promoting something that we know. I don't think it should be illegal, but I don't think it's great for you to go out and smoke pot every day. I know you're going to get, it's just like I don't think it's great to go out and drink every day and get, rip-roaring drunk. But I think that there is a legitimate need for resources when you address the consequences of drugs and of alcohol. And I know it's hard to measure, but these kinds of taxes are, if put to the proper use, I think are very useful. And I think schools are a great way to get at both drugs and alcohol at the same time. So I'll leave it at I believe in the alignment of self-interest is when things happen, when everyone's got a benefit to see from something. And the benefits of having legal marijuana are so beneficial. I talk to social worker friends. When they talk about comparing alcohol and marijuana, they'd much rather have their clients smoking pot than having a bunch of beers, but to relax. That debate's going to go back and forth forever, but there is a legitimate need for taxes. We just want to make sure that government's not trying to market alcohol or market marijuana so as to get more revenue.
Yeah, and speaking of the glacial pace that things move here on the Hill, Congressman, you're the chair of the Republican Governance Caucus, and how is this bill being received by that caucus, and how do you look at, pushing this issue forward among your colleagues? Like, what are the arguments resonating with them? Is this like a states' rights issue, free market? I feel like there are kind of several different angles you could approach this.
You're absolutely right, and people approach it however they view it to come in with. And I'm not out to change their mind. If they agree with it on a states' rights issue, welcome aboard. If you agree with it because you'd rather see people using medicinal cannabis than using opioids, I agree with you. That's one of the reasons, another reason that I agreed to it initially when Sam Farr was making his argument that people are in great pain, and we know what opioids were doing to people, and so why not let them try cannabis because it's not anywhere near as addictive, and if it solves someone's pain, God bless. I watched my father, World War II vet, shot and left for dead, die of cancer, the one thing he never wanted. Every time he'd hear of somebody dying and they're sleeping a heart attack, goes, that's the way to go. And if cannabis would have let him eat one good meal towards the end, who the hell are we to tell him no? I mean, that's the part of it. So again, I really, I listen to folks, and I don't press any of that. Before they elected me chairman, I said, look, this is just so you're all on the same page. I am the co-chair of the Cannabis Caucus. I'm not trying to influence any of you. And most people are like, well, tell me more, one-on-one. And they don't necessarily do it in a collective setting, but one-on-one, hey, tell me a little bit more about it. What brought you there? And I tell them the story like I've told you, and I've told them that when you start working on an issue, the other thing about it, which is sort of the senator had a chance to do it in Colorado, but here it's unique. It's the first time we're doing this, and we're trying to put something together, and we want to do it right, just like you did in Colorado. So that's why I want to take the time that I have as former prosecutor and make sure that the laws and the regulatory framework are tight and it works for everybody, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel every session. Because if it's not permanent, if it's not a fixed standard in the beginning, of course adjust as time moves on, but have a framework in which you can continue to build your companies off of.
And Senator, on your side, in terms of building support for the bill, is there, what would you say to colleagues who feel that maybe this bill doesn't go far enough, that, you know, lawmakers should be really considering descheduling at the very least, and, you know, the more progressive wing of your party, how would you message this bill to them?
And I've heard that, and I'll put it this way. I am the fortunate person. I have a much younger wife who changed her mind, decided she wanted to have a child. So I have a 4-month-old baby boy at home, right? I am living proof that there's at least one more miracle left in each of you. And that baby, let me tell you, he's got to crawl before he's going to walk. And that's how I look at that question. We can't pass the full bill right now. We're really not close. We need 60 votes in the Senate. We're not going to get it. I don't think we could even get a majority in the House, could we? We had a version, a pretty good version. So we just ran out of runway, exactly. But I think that the Prepare Act allows us to get some momentum going and to really get into more meaningful discussions. And I think that's what it's all about. You're never going to change somebody's mind about something they care about by telling them why they're wrong and why you're right. It's only by letting them express themselves and really hearing them and letting them understand that you see where they're coming from. Usually that changes your point of view and you begin to accommodate some of their perceptions. And suddenly you're both moving in different places, and all of a sudden you begin to get towards the bill might change a little bit, but you get to a compromise and you get progress.
All right, well, we are out of time, unfortunately. I feel like I could talk to you guys about hours about cannabis policy, but thank you so much for being here, and thank you guys for coming out.
Go to work, help us get it passed.